Hey, this is Mark, and this is episode 6 of the Why Are We Still Doing This podcast. This is part 1 of a 3-part series on all things video games, including what it was like essentially growing up in a mall arcade in the late 80s and early 90s. We're also going to talk about the transition of top arcade games to home consoles and the infamous console wars in the mid-90s, and general mall culture and nostalgia. Joining me on this series is Jesse Littlejohn, who has been one of my best friends since around age 5, and if you listen to episode 1 of this show, was a big part of the destructive sleepover crew and an important part of my formative years. We talk about the competitive nature of the arcade in the early 90s, the sights, the sounds, the smells, the competition and camaraderie we discovered in that environment, why we long for retro gaming today, and reviewing some of the worst places to eat in a mall food court. So I hope you guys enjoy this, and here's Jesse and I really wanted to talk about what it was like growing up in an arcade, like in the late 80s, early 90s, because those were like our formative years. And that environment was so different back then because it was like, at the time, it was almost like the arcades at that point were almost like a Fight Club because it was like there were so many fighting games like Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat. It was so competitive, like Tekken, Virtua Fighter, I don't know, Samurai Showdown. Like I know I'm missing a bunch, but like. When I think of that time period, I just think of like you're sitting there playing Street Fighter 2 and you're like, I'm going to beat this game on 2 quarters, and you're like 2 matches in, and then some dude just rolls up, puts his quarters in, and you're like, fuck. And you just know, like, you've seen him in the arcade, and you know he's like, he's going to kick my ass. And he does, and you're like, what am I going to do now? And then you walk around, and you're like, well, I guess I'll play Q-Bird again, you know? But that's the thing, like, it was so competitive, because if you wanted to play the game on your own, you couldn't sometimes. You were like, please, no one come over here right now, you know? There were so many competitive aspects. Like, answer this question for me. If you wanted to, like, save your spot in line, like, what would you do? What would you do?
Put your quarter on the bezel.
You put your quarter up, yeah. So, and you'd have like 6 quarters in a row. But I'm thinking about it now. I'm like, how did you know like whose quarter was? That's my quarter. That's my quarter. You know, and we had very similar thoughts about what the arcade kind of looked like. I know when we were talking, but you talk about that because I know it was like you had your own kind of perception of it, but it was very similar to mine.
Yeah, and I just want to touch on the competitive nature of, you know, video games, primarily fighting games in the 90s, in the arcade, because, you know, these days kids can play at home and they can get better at video games. To get better, to get competitive at fighting games in the mall, that was contingent on a few factors. One, getting transportation there. So you had to take the bus, or somebody has to.
I took the bus all the time.
Right.
My daughter I tell my daughter that. I tell her like I took the bus to the mall. Anyway, go ahead.
1, 2, the arcade had to be the cabinet you wanted to play, or the game you wanted to play had to be open.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's open, you could play. If it's a Friday, if it's a weekend, forget it. You're gonna have to wait your turn. And then what you mentioned, you're playing and say, hey, well, you know, I'm trying to get better, or I'm trying to, you know, beat the game, and then somebody comes in and puts their quarters in, then you got to fight them, and they kick your ass, and then, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you can't finish practice. And in 3, you know, you needed the money. If your parents didn't give you money, or if you didn't have a job, you didn't have a way to play the game.
Yeah.
You know, so it was like there's so many challenges like we had to overcome to be like a good player at games like Street Fighter 2.
If you didn't have grandparents that would just hand you rolls of quarters like right. I did, you know. Right. And the thing, yeah, and you talk like everything was obviously in person, and so if you like talk shit, you had to back it up, and you couldn't just hide behind a computer like obviously kids do today. You know, I hear about all these kids like playing games online and doing stuff like, you know, swatting. Do you know what swatting is? Have you heard that?
I don't. Oh, swatting, yeah.
Yeah, like stuff like that is freaking crazy. Mm-hmm. Like, here's the thing I was thinking of, like when you roll up to like a game like Ninja Turtles, like a 4-player Ninja Turtles, and there's like 3 people playing, and you want to get in there, you got to bend down and like kind of to insert the quarter. You'd basically have to like stick your hand like right under these people's through their legs, you know, and like try to find the coin slot. It was just like trying to squeeze in. Oh, excuse me, you know, trying to squeeze in. It was just tight. It was dark. The smells. It's like a state fair. There's like BO.
Right. Yep. And then you had all those smells. I think Sparrow Pizza was out there. I think that was creepy in the arcade there too, and just all these this plethora of smells just kind of would just emanate throughout the arcade, and it created this very interesting smell, like you mentioned, with the teenage body odor and stuff like that. It was really interesting experience. And I was just thinking earlier today, as far as like when you think about like different demographics and hygiene, when you think about like hardcore gamers, I feel like,
oh my god,
that demographic has a higher percentage of people that don't really take care of their hygiene.
Utilize deodorant.
So that was definitely a factor in the arcade, but it just added to the overall experience, I guess.
I know. It was always like there. I was thinking about. I mentioned to you the other day about the characters that we like saw in there, obviously, and we had like nicknames for them. Right? You'd see the same people in there. There was a kid who, there was the kid who always had a backpack on, and you knew he wasn't like coming home from the library to study, right? Like I always wonder what was in this kid's backpack, like this 15-year-old kid that lived at the ball. And then just the same like 5 people that rotated in and out of the arcade. They worked in like 6 different places in the mall. And you're like, weren't you working at like Sbarro's 3 weeks ago?
Did you have an encounter with the I called him the backseat gamer?
Maybe. I think I know what you're talking about.
He would just like stand behind you and offer like unsolicited advice and critique your gameplay.
Was it a specific game?
I want to say it was like either like Mortal Kombat 2 or Street Fighter 2.
Okay. Probably one of those, because I mean, like if you stand behind me like while I'm playing like Turtles, like that's just to beat him up. So he's like, hit the button faster.
Right, yeah. So there's not a whole lot you can do in the in the area of critiquing with that. But I think it was like more of a skill based.
And that's the other thing. Like when you talked about like how hard it was, because when you go into an arcade, so let's say you go up to like Mortal Kombat for the first time, you've never seen it before, and you realize like after a while like there's got to be more than just like punches and kicks. Like all the special moves, you had no fucking clue about. Like how did we find out like half circle forward punch was like a freeze for Sub-Zero? Like how did we find that out? I don't remember. Did we just like, was it in like one of the video game magazines? Like, hey, check out these moves, or did we do it on accident? Like how did we find this out without the internet?
Right, and that's the thing. I mean, we couldn't pull out our phone and find out how to do these special moves. I think it was either from we'd ask people at the arcade cabinet, or like you said, we'd have to look into a game magazine like GamePro or Electronic Gaming Monthly. But I think we all can remember the first time, or the feeling, the first time you've successfully executed either a Hadouken, right, or a Sub-Zero freeze.
Yeah. I was trying to show my son the other day, like on Genesis, because I've got one of those multi-carts and it's got hundreds of games on it, but we were playing with like a 3-button controller, and I think he was Sub-Zero, or he was another guy that had a half circle forward punch projectile, and I'm like, he's just like, and he's like pounding on it. And he finally got it, and he was like, "Oh my god!" Because otherwise you're just bashing away, or playing defense. But no, I remember computer class in 8th grade, like typing up a whole friggin', 3-inch packet of moves, and then we take that packet to the arcade. I think, with the competitive nature it had, it was definitely a place where you learned a lot of social skills and how to interact with people. I think just like obviously being patient, waiting your turn, and things like that. Like I said, you couldn't act a fool and then
and that's the thing. These days, kids they can talk smack and they can hide behind their computer monitor. But back then, the person you're playing, they're within a foot of you. And their hands are well within striking distance of your face. So,
I know.
Yeah. if you're going to talk smack, you better be careful.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. There was also a lot of camaraderie between people at the playing the same video games that were gathered around the cabinets, especially with the new releases. There was always a crowd of people around the cabinets, just trying to peek over people's shoulders, see what's going on, talking about the new game, the new characters, the moves, how to do the special moves, as we all eagerly awaited our turn. So that was a lot of fun, and I don't think kids really have that these days.
No, because like I say, my son and I were at the arcade yesterday, and the arcade today is all right. How many tickets can we get, and what kind of prizes can we get? And that's what it's fun. It's 100% fun. Whereas the arcade back in the day was maybe like 75% fun, and the rest was like kind of dangerous. In a way, just because, again, it had that like Fight Club atmosphere. It was very competitive. You're not going up against anybody like in today's arcade unless you're at like one of these retro arcades, obviously. And you're playing the games, we played years ago. There was an arcade that, I think this is a really important point, though. Like, there was an arcade next town over here, believe it or not, that tried to open. And they dubbed themselves as like a retro arcade. Now, what they basically had was like emulators, and so you'd go in and you'd have one of those like arcade style joystick things, that you could connect to a TV and you could scroll through and play whatever game you want. And it was up on like a monitor on the wall. Not really like an arcade experience. Mm-mm. You could do that like anywhere. You could do that anywhere. You could do that at home. Like, and it's like what people want. And it's like what you and I and Joe, we go to the Quarters in Hadley, Mass, which is a freaking awesome place. We want the actual cabinet. We want the actual marquee lit up marquee. We want, the buttons, the feel. We want the graphics on the side of the cabinet. Like, that's what we want. And I kind of felt bad for these guys because like I think they put like a lot of money into this place, and I don't think anybody really ever went, because it's like, well, we can do this like with buying like a like something like you bought, like you it was like a USB kind of stick, with a controller, and it's got thousands of games, but people want exactly what they grew up with, right. Even if it's not like an old CRT monitor, but they want the cabinet,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I bought a stick. It came with like 12,000 retro games, everything from Atari up to like PlayStation N64 era. So, all these Super Nintendo Genesis games, I can get on there and I can play, but still it's just not the same experience as getting an actual Super Nintendo, and playing, putting in a real game and playing with the original Super Nintendo controller. Yeah, you can't replicate what that's like, that feeling. But yeah, and I agree with you. Same with arcades. I wouldn't be interested in going to a place with emulators and playing an arcade game on a screen. That doesn't interest me.
No.
The old school, the actual original cabinets, like you mentioned, Quarters in Hadley, absolutely. And that's, that takes you back to the 90s, and you feel like, for a brief moment, you're back in the 90s and playing these old school video games and don't have a worry in the world.
Speaking of quarters, when was the last time you actually went to an arcade and used quarters? Because for me, it was yesterday.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, because of the place that we sometimes go to, there's a couple on the block, and it's one uses the card, and the other uses quarters, and but go ahead.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you. There was a place in Columbia, South Carolina, that used tokens, but actual, put your dollar machine, get your 4 tokens, whatever. But actual, quarters, I'm not sure. It's extremely satisfying putting in quarters in the machine, or even tokens. When you compare that to using a card at a place like Dave and Buster's, just swiping that card doesn't give you nearly the same amount of satisfaction of putting a quarter in the machine.
No, because putting in a quarter is also very risky, because it could get jammed, it could not register, and you're like, oh, son of a bitch, because that happened yesterday. Connor comes up, had my back to him. He's like, Dad, I put in 50 cents and it didn't work. So you got to go get the guy. Oh, we lost a couple quarters in the machine, But I think for this place, it's up in Lake George and New York, and part of me thinks like they just don't want to make the transition to do it, converting everything to cards, because they still use like tickets. Like a lot of places, your tickets are on the card. Here they print out tickets, and so that's another kind of pain in the ass, because like, the tickets are falling out of my pockets here. I've like, because you gotta go and like cash them in. Yeah, I remember that when like the very first time the mall arcade like converted to tokens, we were like, what is this strange currency? And I felt like we were getting ripped off, kind of, because you go to the arcade with a $10 bill, you cash in $10 of quarters, you could still leave with money. You put in a $10 worth of token, you're like, well, I guess I'm coming back, right? I feel like that was when the arcade people were like, all right, we've got them now,
But anyway, I do remember the Berkshire Mall, too. I forgot what the amount was, if it was 10, but I know it was definitely 20. Put a $20 bill in there, you would get extra tokens as
I think so, yeah.
Right, which is nice.
Yeah. Did you ever bring in your report card for... Do you remember that?
Oh, wow. Yeah, you would get like...
I don't know, a certain amount of tokens
per A, right?
A certain amount of tokens per A. You get a certain amount of tokens for every B you got.
Wow, I actually forgot about that until you mentioned it, but yeah, I did do that.
Well, it's funny because I'm thinking about it now. I'm like, couldn't you just like, a fake report card? Yeah, I go to, Oakville Elementary here in Cheshire, and where? I got straight A's.
Right. Yeah, it's funny as far as like going back to, the tickets. I remember what a pain in the ass actually the physical tickets were, but
yeah.
I don't know really what prizes look like these days, but you could pump in like $50 worth, get X amount of tickets back in the day and get like a rubber snake and like a bouncy ball.
Yeah. So yesterday we lucked out because we didn't spend that much money there. We spent like $20, and Connor was like, "Okay, let's go cash out." So we had 137 tickets, which is like, I don't know, the little plastic thumb that you can put on top of your thumb, And so I was like, wait a minute, let me look in my wallet. So sure enough, in the far nether regions of the back of my wallet, I had a card from like 5 years ago. It was a redemption card that said 500 tickets for this arcade. So I was like, well, I guess you have like 672 or whatever now. So with 672 tickets, he got a this stretchable gorilla, maybe about this big. I don't know, about the size of my hand. And you can like stretch it out, kind of like Stretch Armstrong, And then for 200 tickets, or no, the gorilla was like 400. And then he got a hand buzzer, like the old like, hey, let me shake your hand, hand buzzer. Well, wouldn't you know, that didn't work at all when we got in the car and drove away. And I
tried to exchange it for a whoopee cushion.
I know. Well, actually, the whoopee cushion was in his range, but I was like, Connor, do you even know what a whoopee cushion is? Do kids pull pranks like this anymore? But I was like, buddy, let's, he's like, oh, it doesn't work. I was like, well, it's not like old world craftsmanship here. Like, but I'm like, let's maybe like take it back next time we come back and we'll say, hey, we just got this. It didn't work. Can we get another? So, but I remember going to that arcade for years and you'd see some of those elusive, unreachable, prizes up on the top shelf. Like, but they were always like, 5 years behind, It was like, I don't know, like a Sony Discman that you could plug into your car. And it's like, well, it's 2002, yeah, and they always had an inch of dust on them, but you have to spend, obviously you have to spend a lot of money.
Yeah, and it was funny, like or try to fathom the amount of money you would have to spend to be able to, obtain one of these out of reach type items. Yeah. I remember the mid 90s as far as like, kind of top of the range. And I feel like this was like real popular when we would do fundraisers at schools too, where like the number one prize was like a portable TV, like this mini portable black and white TV with like 2 antennas that, if you're lucky, may get 3 channels, but probably barely 1.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for listening to part 1. Please come back for part 2, where Jesse and I reminisce about being a teenager in the mid-90s and living through the console wars. Thanks, everybody. See ya.